All right, folks, how we doing today? I think everybody, let's see everybody in good mood, and I'm not in a good mood. Okay, I had a miserable Tuesday, and it's bleeding into my Wednesday. So actually, Tuesday was not that bad until last night. I went to the DSP trivia competition, and a few of you were there. Normally, I'm pretty good at trivia, but the way that competition works is that they have a double down option, and so if you know that every single one is right, then you can double down and get double points or nothing. And it was so frustrating because every single time we knew three of the questions were right, we did not know the fourth one. Every single round, or I shouldn't say three, because like the crossword and the picture round, we had all but one. And we knew that we didn't know what the right answer was, so there's no way to effectively double down. And so we had one of the lowest point totals in the room, and I'm just like, come on, come on. I think Scott Templeton's table beat us. Okay. In fact, I'm pretty sure they did. Yeah, pretty sure you all did. And I'm never going to live that down. I'm never going to live that down. He's going to say he's the king of trivia. I know you say Professor Templeton doesn't gloat, but you just don't know the man that he really is. Okay. But yeah, so that's a low point in my semester. So I almost thought about taking a day of morning off today, but yeah, I bellied up and basically said we're gonna get through this. There was something kind of fun that happened yesterday. So I ran across an article, and this may be old news. Some of you may have encountered this, but they were talking about the cybersecurity protocols during the Louvre heist. So has anybody followed the Louvre heist? It was pretty basic. They basically pulled up to the docks and they just upload or unloaded or would pull, kind of grabbed some pieces of artwork, put them into a truck and drove off. That was basically it. But the way they got away with it is they hacked the camera system so that they couldn't tell that people were actually doing nefarious activities. So the investigators were going in and looking at the password for the security system for the Live Camera system. Anybody want to guess what the password was? It was actually more ridiculous than that.
French.
It was Louvre. Yeah, Louvre. The name of the building was the password. Okay, they actually had a secondary system, which also was the name of the system. So yeah, it's kind of stuff you can't make up. I actually posted about it on Facebook. I was making fun of the fact that we talked about New Cooperative and their password at Chicken One. I said nobody will ever top that, and I mean, so I did a kind of a joke of the Louvre saying "Hold my beer." I didn't say "Hold my beer." I said "Hold my fresco" because that was a little bit more appropriate. But yeah, so that was kind of fun. So we're going to talk today about cryptocurrency, which is kind of a pet passion project of mine. Before we do, though, I do want to talk a little bit about what's coming up. So we've got our next Ultrix assignment is going to be due this week, and then we're going to start Ultrix 4. Ultrix 4 is not due till the end of week 14. I'm giving an extra week to work on it. Couple of things that I wanted to put towards you. So next Friday, I have scheduled a professional presentation, and you notice it says tentative. The reason why is that we always have our accounting and accounting, business, and economics advisory board come and visit right around that time. And last year we had some of them come and present some information, some details, which I thought were very valuable. And I was hoping they would do it again this year, but I've not gotten any traction on that. I've not gotten any feedback saying they want to present. If that doesn't happen, in all likelihood, we will just not meet next Friday. Now, I don't want you silently pumping your hands. This is supposed to be a learning experience, and you're going to be deprived of learning, okay? Maybe you're just like, Dr. Barnes, we're in the Mac program. We got all the learning we can handle right now. Yeah, if that's the case, I get that. But I don't want you to silently be rooting for it. I'm not going to push it. If Dr. Caden reaches back out to me and says, yeah, we got some presenters, then we will be meeting, and I expect you all to be on their best behavior, asking diligent questions. If not, we'll have that Friday morning off. And so that's something I will update you on as we move forward. Also, technically speaking, the research project deliverable is due on next Friday. I think I've been advertising it saying it's due on the 14th or week 14 instead of week 13. I've been promoting it, so some of you may have taken that to heart. I'm going to go ahead and say this openly. I have no problem if you want to submit this late, if you want to submit this in week 14. I'm not going to change the due date. I would hope that most of you will still try to shoot for the next week, but if you want to wait and do it, submit it in week 14, sometime during week 14, that's fine. I want to throw the important caveat out here, and I'm not going to make an exception for this, so I want you to be very aware of this. If you decide to take advantage of the fact that it's week 14, You do not get an extension beyond week 14. You can't email me and say, Dr. Barnes, my week 14 was so busy, and I know the deliverable is technically due. I was technically due this week, and can I have an extension until Thanksgiving week? I promise I'll work on it then. My answer will be no. All right. I'm going to remind you that I'm already giving you an extension by allowing you to do a week 14. I would encourage you, like I said, I know that everybody's going to be somewhat busy with projects that are going to be coming up right before Thanksgiving break. So I'd encourage you to stay on schedule if possible. But given that I know that everybody's busy, if you want to submit it late, I'm not going to count off for that. I will go ahead and accept that. I had every intention of saying that I was going to do the deliverable at the end of week 14, and I just now realized, looking at the syllabus, that I scheduled it for the end of week 13. So again, submit it late. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to count off points unless I say unless you submit it late, like you submit it after week 14. Like if you go any day past the 21st, if you go 12:01 a.m. on November 22nd, your grade will precipitously drop. Okay, by whatever that I mean, from possible full credit to zero credit. Okay, so I am going to hold that guideline I'm going to hold that static. That is not something I'm going to be willing to change. So please use that in your decision-making process. If you decide, okay, I'm going to take advantage of Dr. Barnes' extension, please note that is the only extension you get. All right. I know I've harped on that for about like 2 minutes now. Is everybody clear on this point? Does anybody have a big problem with this saying, Dr. Barnes, that's unfair? Okay. Technically speaking, I don't have to be fair. I got tenure. I can be unfair, but yeah. But I try to make this a little bit more flexible. I don't want anybody taking advantage of that. So, or well, taking advantage unfairly, I should say. You should take advantage of it if you need it, but don't take additional advantage of it. All right, and then please remember the research presentation signups are on Brightspace. So if you've not already signed up for a presentation date, I would encourage you to do so. It's basically first come, first serve. Once all the spots are filled for a day, you don't get to add spots the next beyond that. Okay, so yeah, I think it's like 6 the first 2 days, and then 5 the next day. If there are 6 spots up, you can't create a 7 and say Dr. Barnes will never notice. I will notice. I promise. I'm savvy like that. All right, so let's talk about cryptocurrency. Now, this is an interesting topic from a technology perspective and an accounting perspective. I really liked what they said in the, I think it was the first last week tonight video that I encouraged you to watch. Said everything that you don't know about money combined with everything that you don't know about technology, and it's a truthful statement. I've been studying cryptocurrency not to a great degree, but to a fairly extensive degree, going on for probably about 5 years now. And I will be completely and totally honest, there are aspects of this particular technology that still evade me. And so I do not expect you to be experts in this area. I expect you to have some sort of understanding. The big problem with this is that, first of all, this is something that's going to be more prevalent in accounting moving forward. I just don't think that there's any escape. I think technology will become more pronounced. At the very minimum, we're going to have cryptocurrency transactions, but it's entirely possible that you all will be operating on blockchain systems in the future. So you need to have at least some basic understanding of how those systems work. And then probably beyond that, just having some good understanding of it from a life and practical purposes standpoint is important. Now, one of the videos is really old. I think the original last week tonight video was 2018. So we're talking about going on 7-8 years now. And the other one's fairly recent, was 2 years ago. But they all kind of underlie something that's really critical to note, is that there's a lot of volatility in this area. It was talking about the last week tonight video about how the Bitcoin value had dropped precipitously and then rebounded. And they were saying it was like at an all-time high of 9,000. Does anybody know what Bitcoin's at right now? It's right around, I think it's I don't remember what the amount value is. I looked at it recently. I was going to say 66,000, but I think it's much higher than that. I think it's in the 100,000. Yeah, 103,000. Yeah. So it's one of those things that has rapid expansion of value. And part of me is a little bit sad about that, because I've known that there's just kind of some activity in there, and you can get incredible gains if you invest in it. On the other hand, I just can't practically accept that, because I know that the moment that I invest in a risky investment, that investment's going to go through the floor. That's just my innate knowledge about myself, is that I would never have that kind of luck. But anyway, this is not really an argument about cryptocurrency as an investment mechanism, but though I think some of the knowledge that we're going to gain from this is going to give you some better understanding about how you should approach it. I am agnostic to this. If you are actively investing in Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or crypto assets, only thing I would say is I encourage you to make sure you know what you're doing, because trying to get involved in something that you have no knowledge about, because that's where the road to ruin leads. Now, this is not going to give you all the knowledge that you need for that, but it will go a little bit of the way. So yeah, and by the way, if you did not watch the last week tonight videos, if you're just kind of like I was saying earlier, I'm a Truman student, I don't have free time. You're gonna miss out, because I'm gonna make a lot of jokes in reference to those videos, and some people are gonna laugh, and you're gonna be like, "Oh, ha ha ha." I have no idea what that means. Yeah. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into this. So I had you all watch a video on how Bitcoin actually works, and a little bit of background on this video. This is a fairly recent addition to this particular topic. I've been working on a project, research project. I think some of you may have experienced the project, because I did some analysis in my classes last year. Especially for those of you who were in auditing last spring, remember that we took a day off and we did a project, an assignment on cryptocurrency. And so the idea being is that trying to educate people on how these systems actually work. So we're trying to explain how blockchain works. And blockchain is very nuanced, but I think that they do a really good job in that video. And hopefully you watched the whole video and kind of caught up to it. But the some of the technical details at the end got a little bit above my head. I will not lie. But I do like the explanation of how basically they wanted to kind of deregulate the system and say, if we wanted to conduct transactions on a one-to-one basis, this is an easy way to do that. So this comes up from something we talked about in AIS. So the idea behind this came from a white paper talking about Bitcoin. Does anybody remember the name of the author of the white paper, by the way? Tyler? Satoshi Nakamoto, yeah. So Satoshi Nakamoto, what an individual. What do we know about Satoshi Nakamoto? Absolutely nothing. Okay. Satoshi Nakamoto was a pseudonym, and we don't know who the individual is. And the interesting part is there's a search for Satoshi Nakamoto that's been ongoing. Part of the reason why is because uh, Satoshi Nakamoto has invested rights in Bitcoin, currently around 1 million Bitcoin, which, if you know the value, $100,000 of Bitcoin, that's $100 billion worth of Bitcoin. So some people have claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto, and they've been disproven. Other people have been said, "You're probably Satoshi Nakamoto," and they said, "No, I'm not Satoshi Nakamoto." So we don't know who this individual is. It's kind of an ongoing hunt. And so, yeah, if you're Satoshi Nakamoto, yeah, I guess 2008, what were you all, probably like 5 or 6 years old at the time? Yeah, if you created that white paper during your kindergarten years, then you should probably claim it right now. You don't need to be in this class anymore, because you probably got enough money to retire on. I don't think anybody in this room is. I'm going to say, if you are Satoshi Nakamoto, I would encourage you to claim that and make a good donation to Truman State University. Okay, but I don't think that that's probably likely in this room. Anyway, so the idea was that basically there was going to, the way companies operate is they record upon a ledger, and we know this from accounting. We know how the ledgers operate and all the recording systems, but that's usually an isolated, contained within a single system. So the whole purpose was to actually do a distributed ledger, to expand this out and have all this kept on one, instead of on one system, have on multiple systems, and the updates would occur synchronously. And the kind of the consensus mechanism for this was really, really clever, because the idea being is that if it's kept on multiple systems, then everybody has to agree to transaction before it goes onto the ledger. So say, for example, Clayton and I engage in a transaction, and we both agree that the transaction is valid, then we can both put it on the ledger and agree to that. Okay. That's kind of the way that this operates, and it's very, very difficult to actually engage in fraudulent activities. Now, the brilliance of this comes with the nature of the cryptocurrency and how it's used as a mechanism for solvency. So first of all, the transactions are going to be the crypto asset that's exchanged in it. So in the case of a Bitcoin blockchain, they would be exchanging Bitcoin, which is a part of the process. Instead of having a traditional currency, you actually have this virtual currency that everybody agrees has value and exchanges with. The other issue comes is how does additional currency go into circulation, and that goes with the mining process. Now, you've probably heard of blockchain or crypto mining. That term is probably familiar with you, but how many people before watching this video actually understood the process of crypto mining? I will be honest, I didn't either. I knew it to some degree, but it's not really mining in the way that we consider mining. It's basically solving a complex equation with the series, or basically matching an algorithm and hashing function. And once you solve that, you've validated the ledger, validated all the transactions that are on a block. And by validating that, you're doing a service. Instead of doing that, the organization doing the accounting validation for them, they have these miners doing the validation instead. And by the validation process, say, okay, thank you for validating. You are awarded one piece or one Bitcoin. and that's how the currency goes into circulation. So kind of an interesting process because there's no real mechanism or no real motivation for somebody to validate independently unless they're paid off to do that. And by having these crypto assets as kind of an incentive to say, if you validate, you get these crypto assets. It's a beautiful and nuanced system. Now, there are some concerns in that area. One area that we're not going to talk about today, but I think is one that's really, really big, has to do with the environmental impact. We're going to talk a little bit about the environmental impact of AI in a couple of weeks, but the same can be held true with crypto assets. There's just these massive mining facilities that are going up in remote rural areas that are having just devastating environmental impacts, not just the environment itself, but the communities themselves. I remember watching a YouTube video about a rural town in Texas just outside of Houston that had a massive mining facility that was set up there a few years ago, and the residents are now having all kinds of health issues because of the impact. So there's definitely externalities associated with this, and this is something that we're going to have to take a very close look at very, very soon, if not right now. But that's going to be kind of beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. I'm not saying that it's not important. It's probably something that is, but I do want to talk a little bit about the accounting effectiveness of this. So yeah, that was kind of the answer to the group question one. And so it's a bit summary. There's a lot more to it. Again, I did a very, very basic, very, very high level analysis. I do not expect anybody in this room to be a high level expert of blockchain or of cryptocurrency processes, cryptography, all the things that are associated with that. But I do think it's important to have an understanding of how these mechanisms work and how this actually achieves circulation of these crypto assets. So then what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of put this in an accounting setting. So I basically said, I want you to look at this video, and then I wanted you to speculate on how does this solve problems that we have in accounting? And some of the problems I identified were transaction authorization, disaggregated record keeping, financial statement manipulation, et cetera. So I'm going to start with this first question, and I'm just going to go in group order. So Meg, I think I gave you the hardest question to start with, okay? But I have confidence in you and your group. So what are some ways that a blockchain system can answer the inherent problems that I listed out?
Transparency by like reducing risk and efficiency delays, and then having a blockchain system reduces the risk of financial reporting and manipulation by distributing control and access to a wide network rather than a single network.
Yeah, so you used the T word that I was gonna point out if you missed it, but it was like your third word that you said, and so I'm very, very happy because that was the word. So the transparency, okay. Now, is transparency a good thing? From our accounting perspective, transparency is really, really important. Too much transparency can be disastrous, but we do want some level of transparency to operations. So by actually having a blockchain, we improve transparency in that regard. The transaction authorization occurs at a consensus level. The record keeping occurs across the systems. There's very difficult to manipulate financial statements. They talked about it in the video. If you try to actually add transactions to the blockchain, how you have to manage it and manipulate it, and you have to solve a separate hash function, which is very, very difficult. So practically speaking, it's not possible. Okay, that's not to say that fraud is not possible on a blockchain. This is an interesting point. Back when we still did advising for the capstone projects, this was like 6-7 years ago. I had a student who did one on how blockchain could prevent fraud, and their conclusion is that fraud was impossible in a blockchain. And I pulled up like 3 articles saying here's some fraud that occurred with blockchain. So it's not impossible. It's just a lot more challenging to do and requires a lot more work on the part of the fraudster to do that. So it's definitely a preventative mechanism. It's not necessarily possible. Now, this is kind of the flip side to this, and we've already talked about this back in AIS. This is one of the things we talked about when we talked about blockchain, is that currently organizations have enterprise resource planning systems that do not adapt well to existing blockchain systems. And that was basically all I told you back then. But now I want you to go into a little bit more detail on this. So we're going to go to group 2. Tyler's online and has got a sore throat, so he's asked that he rely on his group members. So I don't know if you refer to that as passing the buck, but I'm going to say it was for a legitimate reason because I trust Tyler. So I'm going to call on group 2 to one of the group members to step up. And by the way, whoever steps up now is not going to be responsible for later questions. So yeah, if Jared, if you want to step up and do it right now, then I won't call on you later when I have more difficult questions.
All right. Integrating blockchain into existing ERP systems presents challenges. Blockchain's technology or blockchain's transparency of transactions can conflict with the privacy and confidentiality requirements of ERP systems. And another issue that we found was that each type of blockchain and ERP is different enough that custom software would be needed to ensure compatibility with the cost of.
Yeah, so if you think about ERP systems, there are some proprietary elements, but generally speaking, ERP systems are kind of structured to be canned hardware and software packages that can be adapted to for use by organizations. Even Oracle and SAP, they're pretty much got the same basis and about which they operate from. Whereas blockchains are customizable and are going to be unique and different for every single organization. So how do we actually incorporate a blockchain into an existing system? I'm not going to say it's impossible, but Jared pointed out a couple of very important details, is that with a blockchain, we are promoting the idea of full transparency, whereas ERP systems for large organizations are saying, no, we can't have full transparency. We give up competitive advantage. So how do you actually find a happy junction between those? And the answer is it's tough. It's very difficult. Beyond that, think about these ERP systems were developed like in the 2000s or the late 90s, early 2000s, based on kind of a view of the technology and business operating environments that existed back then. And now we're trying to incorporate views of 2010, 2020s operating environments that are inconsistent with that. It's basically like saying, all right, I'm going to, is everybody familiar with some of the early video game systems that existed in the world, like the Atari 2600? I put a lot of hours on the Atari 2600. Do you know how difficult it is to hook up one of those things to a current generation TV? It is nearly impossible, okay, because the technology is so much different. That's kind of the analogy that I would say, is that adapting these two systems, they're not compatible with one another. And so it's very, very challenging for the technologies to adapt to one another. But yeah, good explanation. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some accounting issues with respect to crypto assets. And this is something that we're going to go into a little bit more depth. There are two that were talked about in the TaxBit blog, and I think that we're going to talk about a third, and then we're going to allude to a fourth. So we're actually going to talk about 4 different possibilities. I think all of these are viable possibilities, but I do want to throw out the preface here. I'm going to spoil the conclusion. A little over a year ago, it became legal, or it came rule, I shouldn't say legal, it became rule that accounting treatment for crypto assets is that most crypto assets, and these are going to be under a certain category, so these would be assets that are available for exchange and can actually be transferred between parties. So something like a non-fungible token would not actually be applicable here because those are not readily exchanged. But the crypto assets that we're concerned about, which would be cryptocurrencies in this particular case, they are treated as intangible assets. All right. There's a caveat to that, but I'm going to wait for that because I want to wait until we talk about intangible assets as a category here and why it's not appropriate. So it is intangible assets is the category that the FASB has identified that all crypto asset transactions should be recorded under. So it does not fall cleanly into single account type. It briefly explain why cryptocurrency cannot be recorded as cash and cash equivalent or as intangible assets. So let's start with cash and cash equivalent. I'm going to rely on Cole for this one. Okay, so what would be the problem with recognizing cryptocurrencies in that area?
Because digital assets have a lot of swing in their value. It's really hard to get a good estimation of what they're actually worth. A cash or cash equivalent has to have insignificant risk of change, and it's fair value by definition.
Yep.
And virtual currencies aren't like a legal tender, so they can't be classified as that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, those are actually the 2 points that I have on my notes. Exactly those 2 points. So we're talking about how we view traditional currencies. Now, again, this is pretty true in the United States. There is some subjectivity to this, but for the most part, we'd say the U.S. dollar is a fairly stable currency. I'm not going to say completely stable. It does swing in value, but for the most part, it does maintain its value to a certain degree. So if we talk about that and compare that to virtual currencies, or we talk about that or cryptocurrencies, we know that cryptocurrencies have massive changes in value from day to day even. We can actually see certain dates in which Bitcoin has lost a substantial percentage of value, like it's dropped 50% in value over the course of a 24-hour period. That's not something we could actually have for a stable currency if we think about that for traditional currencies and traditional legal tender. Speaking of legal tender, most currencies are not considered legal tender for operations in any country in the world right now. Now, that creates some interesting problems because effectively, as John Oliver said in the video, currencies have value because everybody agrees they have value. And so it does not necessarily need to be legal tender to be something that's operative, that organizations can accept. If you think about it, if we talked about how organizations could operate, we only take for the granted that they're going to operate on currencies that exist in the United States. So imagine you go up to a business and you say, I'd like to purchase this. And they say, okay, that'll be 3 sheep. And you're like, can't I pay you in cash? Says, we do not accept cash here. Is that something they could legitimately do? Probably. They probably could do that. It would be very, very awkward in that situation because they would have some business protocols that would be violated. But if it was ignoring the fact that they probably would be not sanctioned for operation and business by the city of Kirksville, the state of Missouri, and the United States, they could feasibly do that. Okay. Conversely, you could actually go into a barter system in lieu of a cash exchange. So say, for example, you say you're really, really hungry and you go to the Greek Corner Euros and say, I'd like to buy something, I don't have money. And they say, okay, well, we can hire you to do some basic work. And if you do the work, then we'll just give you the food. That's kind of a transaction exchange. That'd be an off the books transaction, which is frowned upon, but it's something that they could do. So practically speaking, I don't think that most businesses could operate that and be sustainable in the United States, but it is possible that something could operate like that. What about intangible assets? Mary, what'd your group say with your problem with intangible assets?
Yeah, they're recorded in the conference and cryptocurrencies can often contain a lot of volatility with a lot of conferences to be unrealized losses are recorded with the assets that will happen.
Yep, there is the crux right there. We were okay up until that last point, okay? So what do we know about intangible assets? Intangible assets gets recorded its cost, and then we adjust for changes in value, right? Kind of, okay, kind of. Once you record the cost, that is the ceiling, okay? Now we know cryptocurrencies move in value, so basically, if it's going to go up, it can't go up as an intangible asset. Intangible assets cannot be increased in value by definition under GAAP. So they stay at whatever that value is. But if it drops in value, it goes down, and that's the new ceiling right there. So imagine just basically you just keep getting lower and lower and lower with no chance of ever going back up. That's the problem with recording as an intangible asset because the volatility implies that it's going to go up and down and up and down. And intangible asset says, no, you just go down. All right. Which I don't think anybody would be happy with a crypto asset in that regard. Now, this is the spoiler I was going to talk about. Under the new GAAP rules, they are recorded, crypto assets are recorded as intangible assets, but they do have the ability to be marked upward as an intangible asset, which is kind of there's a reason why that exists. We're going to talk about why they made that decision here in just a second. So they made an exception saying that the intangible asset in a traditional definition will not work for that reason. So we have to make an exception for this particular category of assets. All right. So one that was not mentioned in the article that I want to allude to. What about something that kind of was intuitive to me and that was never ever mentioned? What about treating crypto assets as investments? That kind of seems what we would assume is the native traditional classification, because that's how a lot of people view crypto assets. Even though we say it's a means for exchange and that was original intention, we've got these big sites that are like crypto.com that kind of show what the valuation is. It says if you have a Bitcoin that's worth $103,000. What does it imply? It says if you invest in a piece of Bitcoin, you can exchange it for actual dollars and about $100,000. So it's being categorized on the basis of another currency, which to me kind of screams out the idea of an investment. Now, is it really an investment? Warren Buffett doesn't think so. Warren Buffett's one of those big naysayers with respect to crypto assets, saying crypto assets are effectively like buying comic books or trading cards, okay? You're just hoping that the next person who buys it is going to pay more than what you paid for it. It doesn't actually provide any value. So think about the way we view investments. If we think about like equity, what is the goal of investing in equity? Well, you provide resources to the organization. They engage in transactions and projects that are going to increase the value of your investment, and then you gain over time. Both parties gain over time. Is that what happens in a crypto asset investment? No, there's no value generation activity going on. It's just saying, I'm going to buy this with the hope that rise in value, somebody will pay more for it in the future. Which, by the way, I will say investing in trading cards and investing in comic books, not a smart investment strategy, okay? This is what I did during my teens and 20s, and it did not pay off, okay? If it had, I would probably be retired by now, but, I would say that I had some hits. I've got some items that are worth quite a bit. They don't make up for the ones that were bad misses, okay? So the ones that I said, oh, this is going to increase in value by 10 times, so I'm going to buy 100 copies of it, and it's less in value now than it was when I bought it. So yeah, don't follow that strategy. By the way, I was not a very savvy college student back in my teens and 20s. Okay, you all are far more savvy in that regard, which may be the reason why I lost in trivia yesterday. So that's possible reason. Anyway, we're talking about that, and then we can talk about a little bit more going to the depth of the tax bit block. So it would be obtained as a medium of exchange or result of crypto mining activities. And oh, sorry, I guess I want to talk about this because there's another one. I think maybe it's going to talk a little bit later. It's going to talk about another one. So another possibility, actually, I guess is talk about crypto mining activities. So we're going to ask this question, but crypto mining activities is talked about in question number 4. How should we categorize crypto assets if they are obtained as the result of crypto mining activities? And this one's another nuanced question because if we think about the nature of mining, items or assets that are obtained from mining are not going to fall in any of those classifications. It's not going to fall in the classification of cash equivalents, not going to fall in tangible assets. It's going to kind of fall in investments, and I'll talk about that in a second. But how would we actually think about this? Think about this in terms of the fact that you own a diamond mine or a gold mine. And so you go in and you mine for the item and you pull out a piece of gold or you pull out a diamond, and then you can go ahead and sell that for value. How would that be categorized in that particular context? Be like an inventory item. Now, that's not a true analogy because more people would argue, say, Dr. Barnes, it's not really inventory, it's more of a commodity, okay, which would be more of an investment. I would agree that's probably a good interpretation, but I think that there are elements that represent kind of the inventory nature of it. And inventory is another problem if we talk about the nature of inventory. Inventory could be a valid representation of this if we think about it from the mining perspective, ignoring the fact that it's more of a commodity than anything. But that's kind of the direction I was pointing at. So the question is that given these represent different business activities, should the accounting for cryptocurrency depend on how the currency was obtained? And this is a trick question. I'm going to throw this out here for you, Ben. This is a trick question. So how would we answer this particular question if we know it's a trick question?
Under the current accounting for cryptocurrency does not depend on how it was obtained. All crypto is treated as an intangible asset reported at cost and subject to impairment. And this can create issues because purchase buying include crypto. They have very different economic impacts, but GAAP treats them the same.
Yeah. So yeah, and the question is basically saying, so very good evasion, by the way. I sincerely appreciate that. That was really well done. Okay. So should it depend on the way the currency obtained? Probably yes. Logically, yes. If a transaction types are different, we should do that. But Ben made the point, says, well, this is what FASB is doing. And, I hold their word as gospel. And I was going to say, that's a good accounting answer. There's only one better accounting answer in that situation. And the answer is, it depends. All right. But, either one is going to be appropriate. So what are some issues accounting with cryptocurrency based on acquisition method? Well, one of the problems that we run into is the fact that we're effectively exchanging the same asset, but we're not categorizing that asset the same way. So if we purchase inventory or manufacturing inventory, so we're talking about that, those are going to be treated differently in our financial statements. So think about how we would account for a purchased inventory item in a retail environment. You buy inventory and then you subsequently sell that inventory. Is that the same way that we do accounting for in manufacturing environment? You buy raw materials and sell raw materials? No, remember you had an entire class talking about manufactured accounting, okay? Manufacturing accounting. So obviously the accounting treatment is going to be different, even though these are both inventory items, they're different types of inventory items. So there is some argument saying the transaction should be treated the same. Now, there's a reason I pointed out specifically inventory. Even though the accounting treatment is different for those two items, can we view the end result as the same item? So a finished good is a finished good, and we can actually treat it as finished good. So there needs to be argument that even though the transactions themselves can be different, the underlying transactions and accounting treatment, the end result should be the same, which is, I think, what Ben's argument alludes to, is why FASB is saying, all right, even though the transaction types are different, it may be a currency in one situation, it may be an investment in another situation, we have to have a consistent end result, which is why we're going to treat it as an intangible asset that is subject to impairment rules, but also can be adjusted upward for changes in value. That's kind of the conclusion I came up with, but let's move on. So related to the previous question, the tax bit blog identifies which types of crypto transactions are and are not taxable events, okay? So example of this, we're talking about whether the taxable events. So if we're talking about something that's where cryptocurrency is used as a true currency, does it make sense to charge taxes if we use it as a means of exchange? So think about this logically. You go to Walmart and you pull out a $20 bill to pay for your groceries, and they say, oh, that's a $20 bill. I have to charge you 15 cents tax on that $20 bill. Does that happen? Does that ever happen to anybody? If it has happened to you, you probably should go to Walmart and complain, okay? Because we don't charge taxes on the currency itself. We charge taxes on the goods, but not on the currency. But what about if it's the items that we can exchange, like inventory transactions? So you go to Walmart and you buy cheeseburger ingredients, okay? Because you're just like, Dr. Barnes has been talking so much about cheeseburgers today, I'm really hungry. So you buy the ingredients and they say your sales tax is $1.05. Is that a legitimate exchange? Yeah, that is a taxable event. But if we're thinking about crypto assets could actually fall in either of those categories. One could actually be a taxable event, one could not be a taxable event. So how do we actually balance that? The answer is it's not very easy to balance. That's why we're trying to come to some consensus here, because the nature of the transaction kind of dictates that the tax treatment is going to be different. Now, this is my olive branch to the tax folks out there trying to talk about tax of cryptocurrency. I don't have a good answer for this. I'm sure there's probably some sort of solution for this that's going to be a lot more reasonable. But the argument is going to be in place that there's not going to be a simple solution, because even if you say this is a taxable event or is not a taxable event, you may say we're exchanging the same asset, it's just in a different setting. So there's an argument for both sides. Any comment from the tax folk? They're going to say, well, Dr. Barnes, you're completely wrong about this. I'm willing to be wrong about this, by the way. I would take pride in being completely wrong about this. All right, so everybody says I'm right about tax. So I'm going to tell Dr. Caden that. Okay. All right. Maybe actually finish my goal where I could actually teach one of her classes of one class session. It's going to be the easiest class session you all ever had if I ever get that opportunity. Okay. So what do you guys think about? What should we learn about tax today? Nothing, Dr. Barnes. All right, class dismissed. Yeah, that'll be it. All right, moving on. So question number 6, in the Gizmodo piece, the author notes that the Financial Lesson Task Force has recommended more transparency in the identification of cryptocurrency users and greater governmental regulation of cryptocurrencies. Now, to note, when I first wrote these questions, it was a few years ago, there was very minimal regulation. I will say that the regulation has improved to a greater extent worldwide. It's still not holistic. We don't have regulation across all countries, and the regulation we do have is very spotty and sporadic. But there has been improved regulation in the past few years. So based on the discussion in this piece and some examples we discussed in this course, what are some key arguments in favor of greater transparency and regulation? Boy, is that a loaded question right there? Does everybody just see that question as be kind of like, okay, Dr. Barnes is throwing us under the bus here? Did anybody actually talk about that in their group? Say, Dr. Barnes is trying to trap us? Because this is totally a trap right now, okay? It's totally a trap right now. But I'm curious as to what you came up with. So let's go ahead and go back to Meg's group. What'd your group say?
Like criminal activities and then we brought up decentralized finance is becoming popular for crypto users because it replicates the functions of traditional banking, but it's led to like major fraud scandals.
Yep. So those are actually the two categories that I listed. Now I had a few more points. I did talk about a few different points with respect to criminal activities. So I said, decrease cryptocurrency use in criminal activities, promote the ability to track illicit transactions, and eliminate incentives for cybercrime. Now, these are all kind of criminal activities and minimizing the use of crypto assets and criminal activities, but they represent different aspects. So if we assume that this is going to be an attractive target for cyber criminals to be utilized, then obviously we want to try to minimize that. So this would be a good mechanism for doing that. Meg actually also pointed out the other point, which is saying that decentralized finance is becoming more and more prominent. And decentralized finance is basically just saying, instead of being a bank at some other party, that it initiates a transaction between the two parties. Now, this is a very interesting point. So first of all, I think there's an argument to say that these decentralized finance organizations need to be held more accountable. But to a greater degree, does even having decentralized finance organizations kind of defeat the purpose of crypto assets in the first place? So what did I say back in AIS? And I know that this was a long time ago. So a lot of you are like saying, Dr. Barnes, I've slept since then many, many times. I don't remember what you talked about that. But one of the things that I talked about back in with respect to crypto assets and blockchain had to do with this idea of trustless exchanges. Okay. Now, what did I mean by trustless? Is like, well, you can't trust the exchange, Dr. Barnes. That's not what I meant, okay? So when we talk about trustless exchanges, the idea would be is that if you have an intermediate, a financial intermediary, you have to include some element of trust upon that party. So they hold your assets for you, and you say, please transfer these assets to this other party for this exchange. So you have to trust the bank that you operate with. By operating on a decentralized exchange, by operating in a blockchain exchange, you eliminate that financial intermediary, which is what's called trustless. Okay. That was the intention, by the way. That was Satoshi Nakamoto's vision. Now we've got all these programs or these companies that are saying we can facilitate crypto asset transactions for you. Doesn't that just mean that we're shifting the trust from banks who are federally regulated and have to have some sort of insurance in place to these organizations that are not well regulated? That's kind of the intuition I get, is that the irony is that we're still trusting an organization. It's just a less trustworthy organization, saying, well, my intention was to actually minimize regulation or minimize the intermediary activity. So I wanted to avoid having a third party in here. You still have a third party. It's just a third party that no longer has to follow the rules. Now, that's a pretty bold argument to make, and you may disagree with me. And again, I'm willing to be wrong about this, but that's something that I've read a lot in recent years, is that because this has become so nuanced and complex, that we do have to have third parties initiating the exchange, which basically means we're back to square one. These are the new banks. These are the ones, the parties. These are just banks that are not being regulated. Yeah, think about this. Like, say you go into a series of transactions, you put your money into a bank, and the bank goes under. Assuming that they're FDIC insured, what does that mean for your assets? Does everybody know what FDIC insured means? It means that a financial institution is basically covered by the US government in terms of insurance. So if they go under, the holders of the assets in that organization will be covered by insurance purposes. Okay. So if that bank that you hold all your money in, if they say, well, we're bankrupt, we can't return your money to you, the government will give you your money. All right. So that's what the insurance protocol is. Let's say you do the same thing with a crypto asset exchange, okay? A transaction exchange. You put $1 million over there and they say, yeah, we're bankrupt, sorry. Are they FDIC insured? They absolutely are not, okay? That's the risk that we're talking about here. That's the risk that we're talking about with regulation. So you probably should have seen this one coming, boys. Some key arguments against the greater transparency and regulation of cryptocurrencies. Hey, Jared, are you happy you dodged this one? Okay, all right. So Jake or Tyler, what do you think?
So we argued that one of the core tenets of blockchain technologies is enhanced privacy by introducing greater transparency and regulation into this space. It would erode that tenet, and it would greatly devalue the market with minimal benefit, because any illicit transactions would just move from another medium.
Yep, and I think that's a strong argument. So, if we add regulation here, then it basically defeats the whole purpose of the original intent in the first place, which is kind of something that Tyler alluded to. So the solution itself may not be to actually promote greater regulation, but to say maybe we need to make sure that people understand that if they're engaging in these transactions, that they're they should do so at their own risk, which I don't know. That's a slippery slope, but maybe it's something that people would learn from. We've shown in human history that humans are not good for learning from their mistakes, but this may be ones where we have to make an exception. There's certainly going to be decreased privacy surrounding the transactions. That was one of the big appeals of having electronic transactions in the first place, is the privacy in transactions. One thing that I kind of alluded to, and this is not something that was talked about, but something I think is kind of interesting, is that this is supposed to be a precedent for something to replace cash transactions, or at least not necessarily actually physical cash transactions, but the currency that we recognize as cash. So what do we know about cash from a basic standpoint? If I have a $20 bill in my wallet, who owns that $20 bill? I do. It's a bearer instrument, okay? This is the electronic equivalent of a bearer instrument, which we can have electronic transactions, but basically the custody of the transaction is going to be dictated by who the transaction is supposed to be assigned to, which can be a little bit muddled at times. So this actually promotes a little bit better ease in transactions if we say that this is basically the electronic equivalent of a bearer instrument. If you own the crypto asset, or if you possess the crypto asset, you own it. Now, possession is a little bit more difficult to establish in that situation, simply because electronic possession does not equate to the same as physical possession. But I think that there's some argument that we need something like that into this day and age, especially with the volume of transactions we experience as a society. All right, so Over the past 2 years, there's been a lot of press, such as the second Gizmodo piece surrounding the fall of once dominant cryptocurrency giant FTX. Now, I personally have a fondness for the talking about FTX. Right around end of 2023, I actually read Going Infinite by Michael Lewis, which is, if you have any interest in this area whatsoever, it's a fascinating book. And by read, you've heard me say this before, I don't actually read books anymore. I pop in my earpods and or my AirPods or whatever those earphones are called now, because they're Bose. My AirPods died. But I pop in my earphones and I just listen to it whenever I have a break and do something, usually when I'm making meals or I'm doing some sort of chore or something like that. So I listened to Going Infinite, and it was very fascinating to talk about. There's been some actually bigger crypto scandals in recent history. Does anybody follow the Binance scandal that's been going on? So this Binance scandal occurred about a year ago, and it was Changpeng Zhao, who's the founder of Binance. He was sent to jail, and Binance was fined. I think it was $4.5 billion for violating anti-money laundering laws in the United States. And so they basically their framework was, look, there's no other option, so we can do whatever we want. That was kind of their business approach for operations for their business in the United States. And the United States says, okay, if you're going to violate the rules, we're going to take all your money. And I say all their money. That wasn't even a drop in the bucket to them, but it took a lot of money from them and put CZ in jail. Now, the interesting thing is President Trump recently pardoned CZ, even though he claimed he didn't know who this person was. He said, I'm going to pardon him, this billionaire cyber criminal, and I'm going to pardon him. So yeah, I don't know what the background behind that was, but that's kind of seen a lot of traction in the press. But talking about FTX was problematic. If you watch the second John Oliver video, that did a really good summary. But effectively, what happened is that people were investing in the trading exchange, putting their money in the trading exchange, and FTX said, oh, we've got all these assets. We can actually shift this over to our partner company, Alameda Holdings, and they can do additional investing with these assets, which became problematic because now Alameda Holdings had all these assets that they were holding, and they were not managing very wisely. It also probably goes to say there was a lot of waste and a lot of corruption going on at FTX, and they were utilizing resources for things that were fairly frivolous. But basically, these were being held, and they were not immediately available because they were being in other investments. And so, has anybody heard the term bank run before? So a bank run is basically when investors get spooked and they go to a bank and they say, I'm withdrawing all of my cash here. Please give it back to me. I'm going to invest somewhere else. Bank runs are notorious for causing banks to fail. In fact, that was why Silicon Valley Bank failed last year. It's because it got a massive bank run. It did not have the assets to match it. That's effectively what happened to FTX, is that Changpeng Zhao actually went online and expressed some doubt in FTX's ability to maintain business. Investors got spooked and said, I'm withdrawing my cryptocurrencies from your trading exchange. And FTX said, oh, you can't do that because they're being held by our other company and being used for other investments. And that's kind of a problem. When people want their assets back, they want their assets back now, not when they get it back. And so, yeah, they were short by $8 billion in that bank run, and they ended up declaring bankruptcy with like a 24-hour period. It was pretty big at the time. It was just like a big scandal. Anyway, I could go into a lot more depth on that, but I just want to answer this last question. So, does the regulatory scrutiny of FTX provide additional justification to the response to the question to 6 and 7? So, Cole, you're going to wrap us up here. What does your group think on this particular issue?
We said it definitely justified our response to question 6 a lot more than 7, because it did result in catastrophic losses, not only for investors of FTX, but investors across like the entire crypto market, as it kind of caused other coins and markets to tank a little bit too. We also said that FTX is not alone in a lot of these issues. The article mentioned like Celsius and Luna, both of these struggle with their values tanking subtly and hurting the rest of the market around them.
Yep. And so this is something that's becoming more and more commonplace in the crypto asset markets, is that because of a lack of regulation in here, then it's basically kind of the way it's described in the videos, the Wild West. That we don't know what's going to happen in one day or the other. You could be happy and fine and then lost everything in the next day. That's not a really good position to be in. So I do think regulation is inevitable in this area. What form it's going to take and to what degree, that's still a suspect. That's going to be subject to determination in the future. The good news is that by the time that that gets solidified and it's kind of finally in place, I'll be retired and you guys will be responsible for it. Okay. So if you want to know, was Dr. Barnes just trying to pass the buck onto this? The answer is a definite yes. Okay. So have fun with that, guys. See y'all on Friday.